Good morning, friends. Here we are once again. We're going to have a little chat, and we're going to talk about lighting the candle, a world that works. We're going to speak for it. We're going to speak it into existence. Our language today will call forth the world that works. Not the world that we say works, the world that you say works. We're talking empowerment, encouragement, and the watchword from last week, this being human, we suck at it. So we start from there with the great intention that we live wonderful lives and that these lives are the things that stories are made of. So with that in mind, I'm Bill Carell. We've also got Vanessa Lewis and our dear friend Ken Caputo. And we're going to kick it off today. And I thought maybe today we would open this up as wide as possible. Possible. What a good word. Possibility. So the interesting part of possibility is our own interpretation and relationship to the word and to it as a construct and also as something that we can speak into existence. So having said that, who wants to go first and maybe a little bit more of an intro for yourself and talk about what possibility is for you?
Go ahead, Vanessa.
Oh, all right then. Thank you, Ken. Vanessa S. Lewis. I'm a freelance copywriter, marketing copywriter. I am now this year exploring freelance writing, even getting into some fiction writing, very interesting. Nonfiction writing I've always been a fan of. And just a very, as I like to say on this podcast, just a very curious person. So I love having great conversations with great people and just, seeing what wonderful questions we get to answer. So starting out with this one, Bill, possible. What does the word mean to me, and what does it mean, I guess how we would apply that in the world. And you even said speaking into existence, making it possible right there. Everything, I love the expression, nothing is impossible. The word itself is spelled I am possible, or I'm possible. And even from the Bible, the phrase I am is very powerful, and Jesus used it in speaking that into existence, talking about who he is, always has been. And I know this is not per se a Christian podcast, but I do like to bring up that point. And also, well, we Christians believe that anything can be possible with him as our foundation. And with him, nothing is impossible, but with him, all things are possible. So talk about possibility as being a foundation for something, and just speaking it into existence. And I think that's what one of your goals for the podcast is, Bill, is just, you said empowerment, encouragement. I think you had 3 E's, and I'm sorry, I love that introduction, but I forgot the third E that you had mentioned. But empowerment and encouragement, I think, were the 2. And then, can you do, what was the third one?
If it's important, it will come back up again.
Oh, you have that amazing ability to just kind of like speak, from your heart. And then you don't remember exactly what you said, so it's good that we record it on things like this, so you can retrieve it later.
Yes.
But anyway, so just I think it just pertains to what this is all about. All of us getting together and talking about what's possible could be possible. So thank you very much. I'll leave it there.
Awesome, Ken.
So, we have a saying we use a lot. What becomes possible? It's more of a question, and it's interesting because it's an unfolding, potential for an unfolding. So you are where you are, and you're doing what you're doing, and you're able to kind of extrapolate that out And it's an interesting thing. I think that we're in a place where, considering that, because what becomes possible, there's no judgment as to whether that's going to be what we would view as a positive or a negative outcome or indifferent. It's simply potential unfolding. And then, it's up to us to get clear so that we can manage those possibilities in a way that, aligns with our values and what we're trying to do. So, the candles we're talking about lighting are ones of what we see as positive possibility, where people are, learning to be more patient and understanding and kind and those things. But that's a construct that we built for ourselves. Someone else could be lighting candles of anger or activism or hatred or whatever. It's a tool. So it's always interesting. And I found myself over time, when asking that question, there has to be a follow-up question, which is, what is the direction your sense of the possibilities, what is your sense of what that direction is? Where are you looking for it to go? So you make sure we're actually having the same conversation with each other, So it's an interesting word with a lot of space for a lot of potential disconnect or connect based on how much work is done in advance to determine what we're all seeing, getting clear on that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And essentially what we're pointing to, possibility, the whole domain of possibility, or as Deepak likes to say, the field of all possibility is where people can transform. It's where they have the ability in a heartbeat to go from being a caterpillar to a butterfly, from being in a state of anger, as you say, or hate or that nature, to love. And if we break it down just a little bit, my original reference to lighting a candle comes from being a small boy and going to church, where the nuns, when I was going to Catholic school, taught us how to go and put a penny into the box and then light the prayer candles. When you were praying for people and you were petitioning, God for their health or for their well-being or for something in their life that you would like them to have assistance with. And then the statement that it's better to light a candle in the darkness than curse the darkness. Yes? So the darkness...
Hey, Bill, sorry, I think that the screen is on me, not on you.
Oh, that's right. I've got you spot.
Let people see your face while you're talking.
Yeah, I can live with me not being pinned. That's okay. So now here I am, and as interesting as all that was, the whole idea of possibility is something that people don't necessarily have access to or facility with. So if we were to think in terms of what is a possibility, well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and put some definition to it. I'm going to say that a possibility is a construct or a future in which language is the access to it being caused or brought into being, speaking the world into existence, as it were. So for instance, I'll give you something to ponder. And this is a very great quote. And the quote goes like this: a future, as distinct from the future, exists in the moment that it is being spoken. So I'll say that again. A future, as distinct from the future, exists in the moment that it's being spoken. So possibility and future are interchangeable in that sentence. And essentially what it's saying is, whatever it is that you want, that's what you speak for. And further breaking it down, there is a distinction between powerful speaking and nattering and chattering and complaining. If you're speaking powerfully, you're creating worlds that other people can find themselves in. So for instance, we listen to great orators, and they talk about, like, for instance, the really great ones shamelessly steal, ideas and actually direct lines, from the classics. And the "ask not" quotation is one that John F. Kennedy borrowed from the Romans, from 1800 years ago. And essentially, those sorts of things in speaking allow for something that's not being talked about to actually occur. So one last take at it. When you and I are talking about lighting a candle, we are really talking about languaging a future that is different than the present and the past that we've been living in. Perhaps it's something where just a simple little thing like common courtesy and common sense aren't as uncommon as they seem to have been in the recent past. That said, if you think responsibly and you speak responsibly and you live responsibly, that's just one possibility, isn't it? So now, in a dialogue or in a conversation, which is what we're up to today, not a very interesting conversation that Bill's going to talk mostly, but the whole idea is, what and where do you stand in terms of participating and actively engaging in the future and in possibility?
Ken, you can go first this time if you like.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I think it always comes back to, there's understanding, and we talk a lot with when we're teaching about listening inside and out, and and sometimes we get a little too self-absorbed. We're listening a little bit too much inside, and other times we get a little too anxious or depressed because we're listening a little bit too much outside, and there's no real balance. There's just the dynamic, relationship between those two and our ability to be self-aware and manage it, and so it's just kind of, it feels like on a deeper level. So I'll use this as an example. We're just working with some people, and one of the things we do is we have them go through this series of asking why 7 times, and I cannot remember who I learned it from. It's been used in multiple personal development, gurus and stuff like that. But we're helping them think in terms of finding their core reasoning for why they're doing something, and then following up with them in our one-on-one sessions. Every single person who went through that process, when they got to their 7th why, started crying. And it unveiled to them this realization of something inside of themselves that they hadn't quite recognized was there. And then that connection, that deep, meaningful connection that required work, like conscious work to get to it, opened up the possibilities in a very new way. They were seeing things differently, and what was important was different. So, so it feels like that's part of what, if you're not educated to that, if no one's introduced that idea, you probably wouldn't know to do that. So now you're going to get stuck on one of these surface levels of reactivity to what's going on in yourself that you don't understand, what's going on in the world that you don't understand, with no real skill set for what to do with that, which means that you're going to be afraid, and you're going to be angry, and you're going to be frustrated, or you're going to be blindly optimistic, which can be just as bad, and the outcomes aren't going to be great. So I don't know. So I guess summarizing is just understanding inside and out, as best you can, and doing the conscious work to keep asking bigger and better questions until the questions fall away and the answer of the moment is revealed to you.
Of the moment.
Yes, of the moment. Yeah, there is no answer, it's impermanent, but you can have a recognition that'll give you a waypoint as you continue to navigate on your journey. So you can't get overly invested in the answer. I think that's the other thing that's happening. People they want an answer, and, leading a company, I could never give that to people. I could give them a process, and even that, we were going to constantly have to refine because we would learn things, situations would change, and we'd have to adjust it. But I couldn't just give them an answer, we give them a framework.
Yeah, essentially what that points to is if you accept the first answer that you get on all things, you will not grow, and you will never be in a position where you are actively engaging, in what anything other than magical thinking, right? Where because you say something, it's going to work out, that's magical thinking. However, if you can engage a question and dwell in the question long beyond you get the first answers, long beyond, and then you start to open it up and you start to spend time really kind of engaging with what's going on below the surface here. What are the things that if I experienced them in my body, I would actually be learning and growing? Or how do you continuously have the kind of energy that it takes to stay fully engaged, especially when there's so much noise? And noise is what I'm talking about, being all of the other possibilities that other people are speaking. Some of them resonate, some of them do not, some of them are not understandable. How do you engage your life and the world in a powerful way? With regard to, why are we here? Empowerment. And we're here, I think we're here really wanting to get to the skinny branches and struggling with what comes next in terms of language. When we get out on the skinny branches, these are the things that we invent together. A person can't go sit on a mountaintop and look at his navel for 2 years and then walk away a lot smarter than when he sat down. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So all things happen in a conversation. All future possibilities, all transformational opportunities, closing the door on the past and the present for a future that more closely aligns with who you say you are after you've asked those 7 questions of why to get to that really powerful, deep level. And crying is a very young response to something. It's actually one of the first 3 things that we ever did, when we got here, before we had, multisyllabic language. We could cry or we could laugh. And the third thing is probably not so pleasant, but we all did it, So the point I'm getting to here is when we see people that are operating in large groups by using the tactics that we used when we were very, very young, are we building something? Are we creating? Or are we tearing it down? Or are we doing something completely different?
It's funny you said about closing the door on a past or a future, and it's just had a conversation with someone this morning about this, like that, the almost like paralysis of having an answer, but then being afraid it's not the right answer. And, we were talking about the best thing to do is trust the fact that you have to test it. And there's going to be some kind of response to that choice. When you're at that choice point, you make a decision, you say something to someone that you care about that might be hard for them to hear, or you commit to someone in a new way. You don't know what's going to happen, so sometimes we get paralyzed and we don't want to do anything. And what I shared with him was something I learned from this guy, Keith Cunningham. He wrote a book called The Road Less Stupid, which is an excellent business book. And he said, ask yourself 3 questions. What's the upside? What's the downside? And can you live with the downside? And his whole thing was, again, going back to possibility, it was projecting out where this could lead and giving you the ability to weigh the consequences of that. And then make the best decision you can, knowing that it may work out for you or it may not.
Yeah.
But the more skillful you become at navigating your own life, the better you'll be able to handle it, or at least have a healthy perspective on a difficult situation and turn whatever comes up into a positive as best you can.
Yeah. Agreed. And so, here we are. This is really a tech talk for, what it is to be human. It's a tech talk in terms of how do you grow language to the point where you speak and things happen. That what engages is other people coming along, or you listen and then you say into that listening what you've heard them hearing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, what gets people up off of their rear ends and into action is that they finally feel this resonance with someone else who's putting into language what they were feeling but could not articulate themselves up to this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden you have a movement. Now all of a sudden you have an esprit de corps. Now all of a sudden you have something that's possible, and that possibility is shared by more than one person at a time. Remarkable stuff.
Yeah.
So if you think about it for a minute with regard to empowerment, encouragement, and I would proffer, no matter what I said earlier, I think engagement is really a very powerful part of this as well. This is not something where you sit in your lazy boy recliner, with the TV remote going like this. This is where you're actually, as you said earlier, Ken, doing the work, putting the sweat in, being willing to fail until you succeed. And then the fleeting success will disappear. And what was that? I don't know. And then you'll try to go back and get that success again. And then there's nothing there for that. There's the whole idea of growing has everything to do with a not thatness about it, if you know what I mean. So it's like in the old days, you set goals so that you'd be successful when you got X done, right? Then you get X done and you go, that wasn't it. It's not that. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's something that I haven't really engaged or looked into yet. So people have to have the freedom. They really have to have, you and I have to have the freedom to get it wrong and get it wrong often and continue to put the risk out there and to stick our necks out. I mean, that's what I say. I have no idea if you agree or not, but.
No, I agree with you. I mean, that's a lot of, I think we were talking about this in a previous podcast, might have actually been last week, but just about having the courage. But then I like what you said about sticking your neck out there and you mentioned we're having the freedom to fail. And so, I mean, I feel like that almost opens up a conversation as to how do we define having that freedom,
Yeah, and what does that look like?
Right, exactly. Does that take encouraging each other? Does that take, a mom and dad who said, yes, you can, or does that take mom and dad who, said, oh, no, you'll never be as good as Johnny, your older brother, or something like that? Or does it take, well, I went to a good school and I got the education, so I know I can. Or I aced my, my sports team. I was the star player on the soccer team in high school, so I can, or football, so I can, I can do anything. Or does it take, I was never as good as my older brother, so now I've got to prove to myself. I mean, just where does that freedom come from? Or is it simply just self-esteem, but then where does the self-esteem come from? And so.
You are doing the work, Vanessa. Those questions, if answered, will move things ahead a very small amount. Those questions, if continued to be examined and looked at from the microscope and from a telescope and from the Hubble scope, gives you like a 360-degree view of something before you say, that's it. And the moment you say, that's it, guess what happens? It disappears.
Thank you. Yeah. No more existence.
One of the neat things that I took away from college physics was the culmination of chemical reactions is to presence something, and then once it's present, it disappeared. So I had that, going on in the back of my mind. There's no longer, what the chemistry was before, the energy that got expended, all that, it just disappeared. The two parts and the three parts became one part, which became nothing. So I heard somebody in a talk that I listened to back in the 1980s who said, that's what happens to conversations. Conversations cannot exist past the time they're being spoken. And I wanted to disagree vehemently. I wanted to say, no, that's not true, how do you think we get books? And his response to that was, once the word is written on the page, it never changes. Is that your idea of a conversation? I had to think about that for a minute or two. And I said, it actually could be the opening salvo in a conversation. Once somebody has read that book or has read that article, that it causes them to think differently. It causes them to question. But it's one more sentence in a conversation over the years. All of the books, all of the classics that we've all read, each one of them have read them from our own point of view, living our lives the way that we lived them, in the country and the state and on the address and in the homes where we lived them. And darn it, is it possible that before Gone with the Wind in 1939, that everybody thought Rhett Butler looked a little different than who was cast to play him? Maybe Clark Gable wasn't everybody's idea of what Rhett Butler was, So I'm taking a breath now. I've stirred the pot a little bit. And what's the next step?
Your turn, Vanessa.
I love a little bit more into the question.
Well, I did have a thought, so I can go with.
By all means, sir.
Just and this was going through this thought experiment for almost a week now, and just I like to think in terms of formulas for working through things, so that you have like when a moment comes up and you recognize you're at a choice point and you're not sure what to do, you have some kind of an anchor or process that you can take yourself through to make better decisions. And I've been thinking a lot about, when we speak, there's an impact, which is what you're talking about, Bill. And one of the questions that came to me is, before you speak, would it be helpful to consider who you're speaking to and the amount of influence what you're about to say is going to have on them prior to considering it? It's just interesting. We all have such an open platform now to just say whatever we want, whenever we want, and people will hear it. Someone's going to hear it. So there's a responsibility to your language that's going to be proportionate to the weight that carries. And I found this a lot, being a teacher and a mentor and gaining trust and respect, people would give you their power. They would ask you, what should I do? And that question always terrified me, because the last thing I wanted to do was take responsibility for someone else's life in that way. So it was always this dance of, giving them some ways to think about it and maybe offering suggestions for them to consider. But in the end, not allowing them to give me control over how they're going to navigate their own life, but at the same time, honoring that trust and trusting myself enough to know that I may have some wisdom that I've acquired through learning and experience that may be helpful to them. So, so this question of who am I to them in this moment, and how much impact is this going to have potentially on them? What are the ripples of possibility? So that's been something I've been playing with that I can throw out there to further the conversation.
I love it. I love it. And the answer to that question, if really thoughtful, for instance, like right now, in January 2021, with all that's going on in the world, what if your engagement in the conversation allows somebody to live? What if it's not an idle dialogue between two human beings like it might have been a telephone call 5 years ago? Now, I don't know about y'all, but I've had over a dozen loved ones diagnosed with COVID in the last 8 days. Family members, best friends for 40 to 45 years, etc. And behind all of this is a stage of, in my opinion, the worst dysfunction publicly that I can recall ever in my entire lifetime. I lived through the 1960s. I do not recall anything like what we're seeing right now. So when somebody asks a question, and if somebody asks my opinion, if I really take the time to think it over, who do I want to be in this moment for them? If I take that moment, then I'm either going to be a consoler, I'm going to be an information provider, I'm going to be an encourager, I'm going to be someone who is the source of love in their life, I'm going to be someone, after I've said what I've said, will not walk away from the conversation until it works. To be a participant and to be engaged in what comes next. So all of that is the best I can do on short notice when I start to think in terms of the responsibility associated with, the power associated with. And Vanessa, if you like, we can talk in the next segment, because we're getting to the top of the hour here. The 3 E's that I want to pose right now are empowerment, encouragement, and engagement. That sound like a stool to you? 3 legs?
Sounds good. You want to talk about the 3 E's in the next segment? Is that what you talked about?
Oh, and much, much more.
Oh, of course.
All right.
All right.
With that
Sounds
said,
great.
we'll see you on the flip side.
See you on the other side.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.